We have a tendency to think, okay, women's health has been neglected so long, right? And maybe I have XYZ symptoms. I can't find any information out there. Well, there's an app, right? Or a product out there that's going to help me with that. I willingly give my data to them, right? They give me XYZ outcome or prediction that I want. And we willingly trade away that data, sometimes from a place of just desperation even, right? To get answers that we've traded away, and we don't think about the downstream consequences that are going to happen from the loss of that data. So the first thing I always encourage people to understand is your data is actually one of your most valuable commodities. Actively crave your data because it allows them to refine their products. It allows them to expand their algorithms and their data sets. They can train their future money-making product lines on you. So I think that's huge to remember.
Today on Bluestock Talk, I welcome Bethany Corbin, who is a nationally recognized healthcare innovation and FemTech attorney and the founder of FemInnovation. She advises digital health and medtech companies on navigating complex issues like regulatory strategy, data privacy, and product development, with a focus on advancing women's health. She's also a leading voice in health policy and advocacy, with work featured in major media outlets and testimony before Congress on reproductive health data privacy. She helps shape the future of ethical and equitable healthcare innovation. Bethany, welcome to Bluestock Talk.
Thank you so much for having me, Allison. I'm excited to be here.
So excited to have you on here. I have been following a lot of the things you've been posting and just your work over the past few months that I became aware of the stuff that you're working on. And I just first and foremost wanted to say thank you, because I think the work you're doing is really important. And also the things you post are really, it's a voice that more people in medtech and just in the world need to hear. So thank you.
Yeah.
So maybe
That's so kind.
well, first, maybe for the listeners that aren't as familiar with what you're doing, give us a little origin story, a little bit of background, and how you've ended up working so diligently in this space.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you had asked me this 10 years ago, I would never have thought I would be in healthcare law today, let alone doing FemTech and speaking on something healthcare related. So I'm a lawyer by background. And of course, when I went to undergraduate, I thought I was going to be a doctor like so many other people. I realized I was actually very terrible at math and science. So I was not the doctor anybody would want. And kind of had a panic attack where I said, okay, well, there goes my life trajectory up in smoke in 3 seconds. By tomorrow, I need to have a new life plan. Like I need to have this all figured out. Realized that I loved reading and writing, and that seemed like a good foundation to go and be a lawyer. And so I ended up in financial services and litigation when I first started out. And as I, continued throughout my career, I was reminded of the opportunities and just, the general disappointment that I had seen in the healthcare industry. I had watched as a child my mother have a very rare illness that was constantly dismissed, and she was told it was all in her head repeatedly. And that took about 8 years for her to even get a diagnosis. And so that really stayed with me. And I pursued healthcare law after that. I ended up, working at large law firms in Washington, D.C., and got an opportunity to go be a law professor. And while I was there, this was around 2018 timeframe, I came across the term FemTech for the first time. It had just been coined in 2016 by Ida Tin, and nobody was talking about it. And I got obsessed. I was like, women's healthcare, something that prioritizes women, that's focused on women, that is, working to build out women's health in the digital tech space, which was just emerging at that time. I could not get enough of it. And so I started focusing my entire scholarship portfolio at that time on FemTech. And the more that I learned, the more that I thought, this is an industry where I don't want to sit on the sidelines. I don't want to think about it from a theoretical scholarship perspective. I actually want to go and help FemTech startups build these products and bring them to market safely and effectively. So from that point on, I focused my career on FemTech. And very ironically, I will say, in 2021, we're at the height of COVID, I had my own women's health issue that was very unexpected. I went to the doctor for my annual physical, and I had almost canceled because it was COVID, and you didn't really want to risk going to the doctor then. I had almost canceled, but I didn't. I felt fine. didn't anticipate anything. Had talked my way out of a blood draw because I didn't want to know cholesterol numbers and things like that. And my doctor's doing the pelvic exam before I can leave. And she just looks at me and she says, "Are you pregnant?" And I just, I laugh, right? Because I'm a career lawyer who has time to date. No, I'm not pregnant. That's not in the plan right now. And she goes and she gets out this measuring tape. And it kind of hits me then that if she's measuring something and she's asking if I'm pregnant, something is in there. And it's huge because she was literally measuring across my entire stomach. So I had emergency OBGYN appointments. I did have blood draws. And after all the testing, it was revealed that I had significant fibroids. And they were so large that I was the equivalent of 6 months pregnant. And some of them were actually crushing my internal organs. So I could not believe it because I sat there and I thought, well, I didn't have any symptoms. How could I have these growing inside of me for a decade plus and not know it? And it really hit me then that I did have symptoms. I had just ignored them this entire time. I had thought, for instance, that it was normal to get up and go to the bathroom 4 times during the night, in your late 20s because you were quote unquote getting older, right? And so you actually minimize and dismiss your own symptoms. And I didn't realize it, but that's exactly what I had done. I then went and was able, because telehealth had started to boom during that time with COVID, I was able to talk to clinicians at the Mayo Clinic via telehealth, and they were able to offer me a laparoscopic approach to my surgery, which nobody locally could do because of the size of the fibroids. So I went up to Minnesota. I had my surgery, and it was interesting because I had never been dismissed before. I had dismissed myself, but I had never been dismissed before. And I'm a lawyer and an advocate in this space. And I had my surgery and I had my pain dismissed by a male physician. I was severely undermedicated after my surgery, and I was basically had the equivalent of 3 days of pain pills. I came home, and this was for a 6+ hour surgery, right? A surgery that's longer than like a routine heart transplant. I came home, did my follow-up with my local OBGYN, and found out that I was undermedicated by about 2 weeks of medicine.
Oh my gosh.
And that just hit me. I said, we absolutely cannot have this for women's healthcare going forward. And at that point in time, is really when I started becoming an expert in this field, dedicating my life to it, working with even smaller startups so that we could start to see some real meaningful change here, so that hopefully in the future, nobody has to experience what not only I, but many of the founders and, women using FemTech today have had to go through. So it was a little bit of a winding journey, but that's exactly how I ended up here.
That's amazing, especially watching your mother, right, who experienced similar. And then I think when it happens to you, you can't believe that you're being dismissed. It almost feels like, well, that can't be possible, but it seems to happen so frequently.
It is very funny, right? Because when I went to Mayo and I'm very grateful, for able to have the surgery there and, very understanding that a lot of people don't have the resources to travel for medicine. And I was able to have a doctor who was very competent, and I'm very grateful for that. But when you wake up screaming, whenever you come out of anesthesia and you're begging for a morphine pump and they tell you you can't have one or you can't have more pain medicine because they don't want you to get addicted to pain pills, even though you have no history. And, you run out of pain pills after 3 days and your mother has to call because you're crying in the background in pain and it's still dismissed. That was unacceptable to me, and kind of full circle moment. I unfortunately, 5 years later, had to have a hysterectomy very recently last month. And, my fibroids had returned. I decided to have my hysterectomy done locally with my healthcare provider here. I woke up from that surgery. No pain, no screaming. I had 20+ days of prescription pain medicine. I had no pain at all during that recovery.
And that's how it should be. I mean,
That's how it should be, right? And it's so unfortunate that for a lot of us, that's not how it is. And, there are a lot of great male physicians out there. Please don't get me wrong. But when you have a male physician and you're under medicated versus a female physician who properly medicates you, it makes a heck of a lot of difference in your recovery, not only pain, but timeline.
right. And so that representation is so important. I feel like there's a lot of folks talking about that now. Not enough. It'll never be enough. But but tell me a little bit more about what FemInnovation is doing and how you're trying to answer some of those questions that people are having.
Yeah, so FemInnovation was brought about because there were gaps that we were seeing in the FemTech community. So, for instance, a lot of times if you mention the term FemTech, 80% of consumers will never have heard of it, including 80% of women who this space is actually built
Well, and you
for.
said it's a
So,
recent term, right? What did you say, 2018 or like
2016, yeah, it's been
that?
here for 10 years now.
So it's a
And
very, it's a
that's
very
it.
young,
It's new.
yeah.
Right, it's new. And, we saw a lot of gaps because of that, right? So consumers didn't know that this industry existed for them. Clinicians did not know this industry existed for them when they're the ones, right, who are hopefully using and recommending products to patients. And as a result, founders have no idea how to get in touch with, patients and clinicians to get them involved in this space. And so FemInnovation really grew from a desire to bridge those gaps. What we created was a comprehensive training course online for clinicians who were interested in getting involved in the femtech space or just learning about it. And, we were able to train clinicians through that program, which has been fantastic. We were able to connect them directly with founders, which has also been very helpful for founders who want to incorporate clinical voices into either their teams or their advisory boards, and really trying to lend credence, right, to the clinical effectiveness of these products, and integration of the clinical voice, so that as founders continue to develop in this space, they're doing so in a way that will be adopted going forward by clinicians and patients. So that was one thing that we really focused on. The other thing we focused on was also integration of the consumer voice, right? Because a lot of times founders are building in a sort of bubble, right? They have a problem that they've identified. They may have themselves experienced it, and they want to build a product that solves that problem for other women. But we need to pressure test these ideas with real consumers to find out what's working, what's not working, what's going to cause these products to sell, all those types of things, so that we have a strong business model that we can take to investors. And so we also developed a patient advocacy circle where consumers could sign up, right, and have these kind of roundtable discussions with femtech founders who were looking to integrate the patient voice. And really, from all of that, and especially the interactions that I had with consumers, it became really clear to me that there was no behind the scenes guide for how consumers should be vetting and evaluating the products that were coming out in femtech in order to protect themselves. And so that's kind of where my third prong of the book that I wrote, which is the FemTech Revolution, came in to really fill that gap on the consumer side. And then, of course, I am, a lawyer. And so I do provide, legal services and that type of thing to founders as well, to make sure that they're innovating in this space in a way that's going to be ethical and responsible for the patients that they're serving.
Amazing. So, and you bring up, there's so many facets to this, right? And I think a lot of, you mentioned the investor side of things, and I've had a lot of conversations, especially with like companies that I've worked with in the past, and they know that femtech and like developing devices or developing products for women specifically, or at least with women in mind, are extremely lucrative, or can be. But a lot of investors haven't been thinking that way for forever, right? And so it's like sort of this new idea of, maybe not totally new, but it's this idea that there's money to be made in this. And sometimes that even is the thing that can help people say, oh, this is something that we care about, which is kind of like a bummer. That's like, oh, there's money in it, so that's why you should care. But it's like, whatever, by all, by any means necessary, we'll try and get the attention where it's deserved.
It's interesting that you mentioned that, because to me, I want more investors to see that there's money in this.
Yes.
Because right now, investment in women's health comes from a charity perspective, right? Okay, we're going to give money to this product to help women out, right? We're going to be benevolent and fund their industry. We're not a benevolent industry. We are 50+% of your population. We make 80% of healthcare decisions. We're not charity cases. We have a lot of purchasing power. We don't necessarily always realize that we do. but we really do. And we have a huge economic case to be made for why investment in women's healthcare is lucrative. And so I think investors need to start seeing that and need to realize the potential here. I mean, it's over $1 trillion opportunity for women's healthcare. And once they see that, once they see, right, the profits that can be made, I'm hopeful that we'll see more investors come into this space and view us as legitimate, a legitimate business case here rather than the continual charity case that we're always portrayed
Right.
as.
And I've heard a lot of folks saying one of the factors in that is making sure that there are more women in these VC and in these investment groups that are helping make those decisions, because they also are like, this is a big market, guys. So
Yeah. And, there's kind of two responses to that. The first is there have been studies that show if a woman is on the team, they are more likely to invest in either a woman-led company or a company for women's services. So it makes a huge difference having a female on the team. And it leads to the second point, right? Which is when I talk to founders and I help them prepare for their investment opportunities and they get in front of those investors, right? Let's say that they're pitching a product for endometriosis and you're speaking to an all-male group. You either get one of two responses. You get is that even a problem? What is that? I don't understand what endometriosis is. Is this something that happens to women frequently? There's no underlying knowledge. And so then the founders have to spend a significant portion of their pitch educating the investment team on why this is even a problem for women, why so many women experience it. And then we still have to make the business case for it. So we have a hurdle there because it's inherently something that a lot of men don't understand whenever we come to the table. The second response that I get, and I see a lot with investors as well, is, oh yeah, my mom or my sister had that. So I kind of understand what you're talking about, but they had surgery and it went away, or they went on pain medicine and it went away. So I don't think that's really a big deal. And there's no real understanding of how this impacts women's lives, even when they know someone, unless it's somebody close to them who they've seen go through this journey and how it's actually impacted their healthcare. And so there's a huge uphill battle that founders face in femtech. And it's also a little bit of a self-perpetuating cycle because, for instance, we have a lot of censorship in women's healthcare, that type of thing. So, consumers don't know femtech exists. They can't fund it. That then means investors don't want to fund it because they think that, this isn't a lucrative market. And so we have a self-perpetuating cycle there, all of which serves to enhance and increase the barriers that founders in femtech have to getting capital.
yeah, absolutely. I think there's also, to your point of the uphill battle with even the conversations that we have with our friends and our partners and our male allies, right? It's a lot of these are like,
Yeah.
you said the guys will say, oh, it resolved on its own. It probably didn't, right? Like it was probably something that she was like, I'm going to go it alone, or I have to, I will take care of this. I don't want to, cause problems or make anybody worried about what I'm going through. But I feel like a lot of it has to come up with these conversations. Like we need more people talking about these things.
Yeah.
I'm sure
Yeah.
founders don't walk up in front of an investor group and say, I'm going to talk to you today about a mysterious thing called erectile dysfunction, and have to explain this for 5 minutes. Like, it's just, sorry.
Right, because all of them are going to say, we know what that is, move along.
Yeah. Sorry, getting off
But anytime you try to talk about the female body, right, it's like this not only foreign substance, but it's also this inappropriate substance where you're like, ooh, I'm going to kind of cringe because I don't want to hear more and I don't want to hear anatomically correct terms because it's conditioned in me, right, that that's pornographic and inappropriate.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the censorship that you mentioned, I've been fascinated with watching even just some of the social media channels and the things that they block or images that they block, and you're like, that doesn't seem right. Like, why are we not allowed to talk about these things? So,
right. I mean, even a breast exam, right? How to perform a real breast exam that you should be doing every month is blocked because of the word breast.
yeah.
Right? Which the algorithms then flag as being inappropriate content and mature content should not be publicized. And so you can't even get educational material. But heaven forbid, right? As you mentioned, you have erectile dysfunction and you want to get hard. There's an ad there that says get hard, right? Or I had sex with my husband 20 times and he's still hard. And all of those totally fine, not
Yeah, no,
inappropriate.
it's totally fine. I will say I haven't enjoyed how creative there's like some of the breast exam advertisements and that are like just trying to get the word out. And so they'll use fruit or they'll use other ways to get their point across. And I'm like, those are also extremely well done and very viral. You know, like they're so I don't know,
Yeah.
people remember those things and people love a story. So
Right. And it all comes from the fact that we can't advertise the same way that a male product can advertise. And so we do have to get creative, right? We have to use fruit. We have to use other objects. We have to come up with nicknames for female anatomy that aren't going to get banned or have your shadow banned on those accounts. And it's hard, right? Because to a certain extent, that reinforces the, shame around women's healthcare and, the ability to not talk about it publicly. And at the same time, as you said, right, sometimes those stick even better with, the consumer audience base.
yeah. So one of the things that I'm going to weave some optimism into this. I've heard a lot of young girls, especially I have a preteen daughter, and all her friends are just there. They all talk about, oh yeah, no, I don't have my period yet. Or, and then some of the high school kids, they'll walk down the hall with their tampon because they're going to the bathroom. It's my time of the month. And I'm like, oh, what a liberating thing to be like, this is my body. Like, this is something that I'm dealing with. And that there doesn't seem to be as much shame as there was 20, 30 years ago when I was a teen. Like, it's just, so
Yeah.
I'm optimistic that our the future generation is going to be a little more willing to talk about these things and not get the ick, which is, something she says.
Yeah, no, I have seen that as well in terms of, the openness of the future generations to not, shy away from these topics and to be more open about things like having, a menstrual cycle, because it's something 50% of the population has. So why are we hiding it? Why are we shameful about it? So I think that's wonderful that they're able to have those
Yeah.
conversations, and I wish older generations could as well.
Yeah. And it is getting the older generations to also be like, hey, how do you support, like working with my mom and, this is grandma that's also going to be talking about stuff with you. It's like, and talking about health issues that she's experiencing. I've definitely been more interested. This sounds terrible. Like I've always been interested in my parents' health, but even more so now, even more with my mother, just seeing, hey, you're genetically very similar to me. I want to know what you're experiencing because I want to know when and what the symptoms were, because those are going to be things that I want to be thinking about now. And how do I better prepare myself when I'm your age? So
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so one of the things that you talk a lot about is privacy, right? And like data privacy, and especially with a lot of the changes in certain rules and regulations that have happened over the past year or two. What are some of the ways that you help ensure privacy and recommend that women also know what to do with their data privacy?
Yeah, I mean, privacy is such a misunderstood concept. And it's misunderstood at a couple of different levels. The first I would say is that consumers misunderstand privacy. First of all, we undervalue our data, right? We have a tendency to think, okay, women's health has been neglected so long, right? And maybe I have XYZ symptoms. I can't find any information out there. Oh, there's an app, right? Or a product out there that's going to help me with that. I willingly give my data to them, right? They give me XYZ outcome or prediction that I want. And we willingly trade away that data, sometimes from a place of just desperation, even, right, to get answers, that we trade it away and we don't think about the downstream consequences that are going to happen from the loss of that data. So the first thing I always encourage people to understand is your data is actually one of your most valuable commodities. Companies actively crave your data because it allows them to refine their products. It allows them to expand their algorithms and their data sets. They can train their, future money making product lines on you. So I think that's huge to remember. One of the statistics that has always stuck with me is that if somebody were to obtain your healthcare information and sell it on the black market, it is 50 times more valuable than your credit card information. So we worry about our credit cards, right? Most of us are, very protective about making sure we don't have, credit card theft. But what about healthcare data theft? What about the ways that we aren't protecting something that is worth 50 times that on the black market? So that's always my first thing that I tell people is recognize the value of your data. It's not valueless. It's something that you should be cautious about giving away. The second thing that I tell people is before you even pick up an app, right? And it doesn't even have to be a FemTech app, right? It could be a health app. Now, a lot of these principles are widely applicable. Think about what uses of data you're comfortable with and under what circumstances. This could be a 10 or just 15-minute reflection where you sit and you think, okay, yeah, right, my name, right, my address, my demographic information. Okay, almost every app I use is going to ask me for that. I'm probably okay giving that away. Okay, my healthcare information. Well, let's see, maybe if it's my weight, right, or my height, right, those types of things. Yeah, I'm probably okay giving that to things like a fitness app, right, as it's calculating, my metrics and things like that, which I need to track my fitness. Okay, I can get on board with that. My reproductive health data. Ooh, maybe that's something, maybe I don't want my fitness tracker to have that, right? Maybe I have a period tracker or an endometriosis app. Okay, yeah, maybe that's okay for them to have, but my broader healthcare app, maybe I don't want it to have that, right? And so I talk about this in the FemTech Revolution. I have a checklist for you. Go through those categories of data and just figure out what you're okay with. And what I'm okay with could be totally different than what you're okay with. It's a personal preference, and that's totally fine. But have an understanding of what data you are or are not willing to trade. And once you have that baseline, it becomes very easy and very quick to compare the different apps and their privacy protections against your minimum standards. And so you can easily, and you can do this within, 10 minutes, easily pull up an app that you're considering and their privacy policy. And I'm not telling you to read the whole privacy policy because I think that's completely unrealistic. Nobody has time to read the privacy policies of every app that they use. It would take years of your life. But go to the section and you can, control F for data use and data collection. Those two sections, read through them, skim them, and look for what data they're collecting. Does the data that they want match with the data you're comfortable giving for that kind of an app? If so, great. Checkbox 1 complete. If not, think about that and think maybe there's another app out there that's not collecting as much data that's giving me these same benefits, and go and check out a different app. On the data use side, what you're really looking for there is how are they using my data? Because almost all apps are going to use it to improve their internal products, right? To share downstream with any business partners, right? Like lawyers or accountants that they need, who would need to have that access information. That kind of stuff you're probably going to find in almost all the apps. But things like selling your data downstream, like to data brokers, that's a red flag to me. And that should be a red flag to you because once data is sold, you cannot get it back. You have no control over how that data is used downstream. So as a result, that to me would be an automatic no. I would close that app and I would go find another app out there that maybe does similar things that's going to have better privacy protections. The other thing, especially in today's post-Roe versus Wade world, to think about is how are they protecting my data if law enforcement comes knocking? Are they going to be handing this data over, right? Are they, going to be taking a case-by-case basis? What protections do they have in there that are going to work for me if for some reason my data could be subpoenaed? Now, the other thing that I say as well is, let's say, okay, I think they've checked some of my boxes. Maybe I'm still not 1,000% sure, right? Maybe it says on their privacy policy that, yeah, they can, give data to law enforcement officers. What I also do is I go to the company's website and I look at their FAQs. A lot of companies that are privacy protective are going to have a page, and I encourage my clients to do this, to have an FAQ on their privacy policies and how they respond to law enforcement requests for data. And right there in the in the FAQ, you can see more information that maybe they couldn't include in the terms and conditions or the privacy policy. And so that can also help, take a maybe to a yes.
I love the idea that you're encouraging companies to make this, to give more information, to put it in their FAQ, because if really at the heart of femtech and medtech and healthcare is to take care of people, then you should want to also take care of their data, right? If data is a big part of who you are, then it should be something that
Yeah,
they also give a hoot about.
absolutely. And that's the thing too, right? We have a lot of really good actors in the femtech space. And part of the problem is that as consumers, we don't have an easy way to distinguish who's a good actor and who's a bad actor here, especially when it comes to data privacy. So what we're left with is having to figure it out on our own. And before FemTech Revolution, we didn't really have a guide on how to do that. And if we don't have a guide, right, that we're just kind of pick that best app that we can find on our own. We're not going to know what to look for. And unfortunately, as consumers, right, we're paying with our dollars. We are supporting which apps are going to make it or are going to fail with our dollars. So if we're unintentionally supporting something that's not privacy protective, when there's a better privacy protective app out there that we could be supporting, we're signaling to the market that privacy is not important to us as consumers. And therefore, we have no incentive in the marketplace for companies to adopt enhanced privacy protections. So we essentially shoot ourselves in the foot there because we're voting with our dollars to say, yeah, it's okay that you disregard my privacy, partly because we don't know how to vet these things because as consumers, why should we have to know
Right.
that, right?
And as you said,
Why
it's
can't
like
there be?
a 500-page document that I'm like, sounds fine. I accept all the
Yeah,
cookies, take my data, right? It's like, oh, maybe think
right.
twice.
Right. And then what happens, right, going back to the investment, is investors say, okay, yeah, we're not going to put money into the privacy enhancing ones because they have higher costs, right? It costs more to be privacy protective. There's not an economic advantage for that. And so as a result, right, we signal to investors that it's okay to put your money behind products that are less privacy protective. And that's why I always tell my clients, especially, right, build out a quick FAQ page that has your policies clearly stated for the average consumer to find you fast, find you quickly, and you're much more likely to attract somebody who otherwise would have to wade through your privacy policy and doesn't want to take the time to do that.
Right. Yeah, and I think with a lot of the changes, especially I'm so focused on what's going on at FDA oftentimes that I think there's been a big shift in general wellness and giving people more uh or more making med tech or even just apps and mobile medical apps more accessible to folks, which sounds like a good idea. And it is for the most part, right? Like giving people, more information about their health and giving them access to these things. I think that where it becomes risky is, as you said, if people aren't educated in understanding what they're giving away when they buy an app. And I think a lot of folks think, oh, this company must have my best interest at heart. Maybe, yeah, do a little due diligence on it.
Right. And it's hard as well because we make certain assumptions about our healthcare data, right? We know that there's the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act, HIPAA, right? Yeah, we've all heard of HIPAA. And it's very easy to assume that these digital health applications that come to the market are required to follow HIPAA. And that is a huge misconception that I see in consumers day after day. And I always like to tell people, right? You can take the same exact data, give it to your digital health app, give it to your healthcare provider. It's protected when you give it to your healthcare provider and no protection when you give it to your digital health company, except for whatever protections that company decides to place on that data in their privacy policy. So that I think doesn't settle into a lot of consumers initially whenever they think about data privacy. And I think as I personally think about it more and more, that's what makes it so critical for us as consumers to take an active role and spend 10 minutes looking at how we can choose the best privacy protective app to protect
Right.
ourselves.
That's fascinating.
Yeah.
And so I loved when you said everybody's different, right? And so what I may be
Yeah.
accepting of the sale or the sharing of my data, my medical information is going to be different than somebody else's. I think the same of even to come full circle, just about like the various stories that we have. Like there's been so much that each woman, each person has dealt with in their life, and it's almost like telling your story or what are you willing to share with others, and really having that conversation with yourself. Which I mean, it's a evolving conversation too. So
It is, right? And to think as well, how can my story be meaningful or beneficial to somebody else who's going through the same thing? Because I think there's a lot of stigma that we still have around women's healthcare in terms of discussing it publicly. Now, as we can see, right, with your preteen, that's starting to break down, which is really exciting. But for older generations, right, we're not used to being so open about what we've gone through. We see it as, kind of a negative. There's stigma on me for having gone through that, and therefore it's not something that I should share publicly. And when we do share it publicly, what I have personally found, and I have seen so many others find, is such a sense of community and others saying, I had that, right? Or hey, I'm going through that right now. Here's what worked for me. Here's this app you should try. And we get a community that we didn't have before, the more open that we are.
Absolutely. One of the stories that I'm very happy to see get shared is about men getting vasectomies. Like, there's been a huge push because so many men are like, why should my partner, or if my wife, why should
Yeah.
she be the one having to deal with birth control still, right? And especially because
Right.
it's so
Right.
like hard on women's bodies, and like these hormonal birth controls that people are on. And so I feel like there's been a huge shift of men being like, I'm getting a vasectomy, and making it the cool thing to do. And I even there was some influencer that I watch. He's like, hey, I'm in the hospital. I'm here getting snipped, because men who get vasectomies are men who get laid or something like that. And I was like, whatever the message needs to be, it comes back, feeds back into like helping women not have to be the ones that bear the burden of a lot of these
Yeah.
things. So yeah.
Well, exactly. Exactly right. I love that. I love that.
Sharing just more in the light of like, let's share more stories. So
Right. Well, and it's very helpful in shifting the burden onto men for things, right, that they can do and they can control that are mutually beneficial.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think just that awareness. Anyway,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
again got us off topic because I have so many questions for you, and I know I don't have 5 hours for all the things that I have on on my list to ask you. Just out of curiosity, what do you think, because you're so in the femtech space especially, is there any sort of femtech that you think right now is like overhyped and it's like meh, or one that maybe is totally overlooked that you wish would get more focus, or both?
Yeah, I think there's both, right? So I think if we're looking at kind of market saturation right now, obviously I think you have the most market saturation when it comes to menstrual health and period health. I think that there are a lot of apps in there, especially, and not to pick on free apps, right? But especially free apps that don't necessarily live up to privacy promises or accuracy promises. There were studies, and granted, these were earlier studies, right? So we've hopefully moved into a more accurate space, but there were studies that looked at 100 plus free period tracking apps and found that none of them could accurately predict ovulation. And so, things like that to me suggest that to a certain extent, some products are in here for women's healthcare for a money grab and not because they're trying to actually improve the women's healthcare experience. So, period tracking apps to me represent a very low cost entry point into women's healthcare, right? That a lot of companies can put together relatively quickly and try to profit off of women's health. That's not to say you should not use period tracking apps. I think that period tracking apps have a place. I think the reputable ones like Clue are absolutely making headways in this space and are incredible. And it's, to me, one of the things that Clue is doing, right, is they're using the data that they're collecting to help inform clinical research that happens with their clinical partners, right, and other, education institutions. So not only are they collecting data, right, but they're using it downstream to help build these larger data sets that we can then help to understand women's healthcare issues better. I think products like that are phenomenal, right? And they do a lot of the privacy protection and things like that the right way. So, well, I do think, kind of menstrual health and period tracking is a really saturated market right now. And I do think there's, bad actors in them, right? The reputable companies that we're seeing, like Clue, in that space are extremely beneficial. In terms of, maybe some lesser known areas. So, for instance, there are companies that are coming out with tampons that can actually test for cervical cancer. So I think that's huge because one of the huge barriers we have in healthcare, right, is who wants to go to their doctor and get a very uncomfortable pap smear every couple of years? So that's, a deterrent for sometimes going and getting your annual physical. Making that into something that women use on a daily basis and can potentially, start to test for that also in between, visits, that could be huge and game changing. So I think that's really cool that we're starting to see companies looking at how they can use everyday women's healthcare products to fight cancer. Um, so I'm really excited for that. And I think, and there's also like, in addition, kind of the tampon stuff, there's also kind of like I guess it's like a wand, I think is what they're calling it, for teal health.
Oh, I
They're one of the
love
ones I've
teal
really been
health. Yeah.
following. I love them on the cervical cancer screening front. So it's like an alternate to the pap smear. I don't think it's like a tampon, but I think it's a wand. So that's been
It's like
really cool to follow.
a home collection kit, right? Or like,
Yes.
and I feel like it
Yes.
was so hard for so long for FDA to accept home collection or anything, like anything that migrates into the home. It was like, how are users going to actually use it, and are they going to get things right? Which fair. That's a very fair question
Exactly.
because humans are not the best at reading the instructions for use packets that come with most devices or things, but
Not.
we can do it. Like I feel like, especially something that you're going to be inserting into any orifice, you should actually really think about, how it's going to work and make sure you only
Yeah.
have to do it once too. So, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. I love them. Another company that I have my eye on, it's not an app per se, right? But it is AOADX, which is really looking at early detection of ovarian cancer using AI enabled technology. So that would be really cool if we could get a blood test basically for ovarian cancer, because right now most of those cases are found late stage, and I lost my aunt to ovarian cancer. So that to me is really cool and kind of outside the box thinking. Another one that, is interesting is called iBreast Exam, which is this device that you can use. Right now, I think it's only approved for clinicians to use during your visits, but it uses AI to map the tissue in your breast when your doctor does your breast exam. And it can identify breast lumps early in like just a few minutes without any type of pain or radiation. I'm counting down the days till that could be like an in-home consumer product where I could use that on my monthly breast exams. So I hope we get there. But that's one. And then I'll put a plug out as well. This isn't a digital product at all, but it's interesting because it's called Heart Snug. And it's a medical bra that you can essentially wear when you go to a doctor's office or a hospital for tests. And it keeps you covered, right, and private during those tests. It's like fully safe to use with x-rays and things like that as well. And so it's kind of like an alternative or an addition to the hospital gown. And so I think there's
That's
a lot of
amazing.
cool technology
Yeah.
that's coming up, and just innovation in that space
And
as
that's
well.
also a privacy thing. A privacy device
Exactly.
for,
A patient right there.
I think actually it's so
Yeah.
amazing that you mentioned that device, because I think I met either the CEO or somebody at the HERS conference where yeah, and I got to see it, and sort of I was just like, oh, this is so cool. I feel like there's more
It's really
conferences
cool.
that are focusing also on femtech and just the really
Yeah.
innovative devices that that answer some age old questions, or like things that like, why should this look how, like the when I met a woman who was working on a new type of tenaculum, right, that usually you have to
Yeah.
like uh really grab onto the cervix and to insert an
Yeah.
IUD, and she has one that's just a very simple little suction device that it's very gentle. There's, like, I was like,
That is so
why did
cool.
this take so long? Why are we using sharp
Right.
forceps still?
Right. Why have we had no innovation in centuries? But okay, you suffer, women. You suffer. It's all right.
Oh, well, hopefully we're getting there, like I feel like
Yes.
that's
Yeah.
how medical devices haven't been regulated for very long. I often feel like, oh, people think med devices have been around for centuries, which they have, but regulation wise, it's only been 50 years, and so this is sort of a nascent space, and I am optimistic. I always try to have those Not that I have rose-colored glasses on, but I do have an optimistic outlook that things in femtech and in medtech in general are looking up. So
I do too. I know it can be hard for a lot of people in the current administration to feel that way, especially with, funding getting cut and that type of thing in women's healthcare. But I do think as consumers, if we continue to vote with our dollars and show what's important to us, then industry is going to follow. Investors are going to follow. We're going to get these products to market. And we have so much power to make that happen. We just have to realize
yeah.
it.
Yeah, and especially with if things are approved overseas or in other countries, like people are starting to see like, why don't we have that? Like that's a really cool device. Like we want that too. So
Exactly.
I think the patient advocacy piece are just uh patients speaking out and saying this is something that we want, or how do we vote to get that accessibility to that? And I think that's super important. And
Yeah.
COVID changed a lot of that,
Yeah.
right? We see a lot more in the home, a
Oh,
lot more
so much.
telehealth, as you even mentioned that you were able to have a telehealth appointment. Like, so things are shifting. It's just, yeah, it takes time.
Yeah, it takes time. It takes time. It takes support. It takes consumers demanding this change. I mean, if 50% of the population and 80% of healthcare decision makers demanded this change, think of how fast that would
That's so
happen.
true. Yeah. I think that's the clip that we're going to put at the front of the podcast. I always ask, I know we're short on time, so I always ask this of every guest that I have. Is there a device or some sort of med tech that has benefited your life directly or the life of someone who is near and dear to you?
Yeah, I think for me, what's been interesting, and I don't know that I ever would have thought this, prior to coming into femtech, right? But for me, period tracking apps made a huge difference in my life using, apps like Clue, because when my fibroids came back, because I obviously did not use any type of period tracking app before my myomectomy. Whenever I went to Mayo Clinic, because I was on birth control, I'd always had heavy bleeding, right? Heavy periods, that type of stuff. And we've always controlled it with birth control. And then after my myomectomy, about 4 years later, my symptoms came back, even with birth control. I had fibroids regrowing. And for me, using those period tracking apps was a way to keep track of my fibroid symptoms so that when I went to talk to my doctor, I wasn't just saying, oh, hey, I'm having breakthrough bleeding. Because my doctor's going to say, okay, well, maybe we'll switch your birth control, right? I was saying, hey, I had spotting 10 days out of this month, only 2 days off, right? I had gushing, XYZ dates. And I was able to build an actual case to show my doctor how my fibroid symptoms were progressively getting worse month after month, so that when we came and we thought about, okay, what treatment should we try, we were able to directly correlate their effect, with the data that I had on my body. That to me was huge, because if I had just come in and said, hey, you know what, oh yeah, we're seeing a fibroid on the scans that you have, oftentimes it can be a small fibroid that even causes a lot of pain and a lot of symptoms. And so to actually have the symptoms, be able to back it up with data and bring that to my provider and work through a treatment plan, that was huge for
Amazing.
me,
Yeah.
because then I felt like I wasn't getting dismissed, right? I was able to say, hey, I've had bleeding for 3 months straight. That pill you put me on doesn't work. I need to up it, let's up it to XYZ dosage. Let's try this. Here's our next steps, right? We were able to build that plan because we had the data showing the trajectory.
That's amazing. Yeah. And I do feel like having the chart to show, right? It's like, you don't just believe me when, I don't know if many people know this, maybe 49% of the folks that might be listening. But like usually as a woman, you walk in and they say, when was the first date of your last menstrual cycle? And I'm like,
Yeah.
my eyes glaze over. I'm like, let me think. But you're right. Like I have the chart and here's exactly like all the information.
It was
It provides more, I don't know, just better care.
Well, it does, right? And it makes them more impactful stories. So, for example, when I went in January to see my provider, right, and they asked that question, was first day of your last period? I said October 13th. And they're like, wait a minute, no, no, no. I said, yeah, I have been bleeding straight from October 13th to January 11th. You know what I mean? And they're able to say, okay, like, and here's the data to back
Right.
it up. And as women, right, we're so often, we talked about dismissal, but we're so often dismissed in our own healthcare provider conversations. And we have 15 minutes, if we're lucky, to make a case to our provider. So if you have a summary paragraph and all of your data printed out and ready to go and hand to your provider, you save so much time because you're not sitting there trying to remember. You're not
Going
sitting
like
there
one, two,
trying to
three, four.
explain. Exactly. You have the data, they see
Yeah.
it, and it moves your appointment along in a way that's going to be really effective for you.
That's amazing. Well, thank you for sharing that. I really love the Clue device as well, and I've had many people recommend it and download it and say like this is such a good app to use. So
It's a great
very
one.
cool.
It really is.
So last question, where do people find you? And maybe backup question is where do people download or get your book, FemTech Revolution?
Yeah, so you can find me. I'm very active on LinkedIn. You can find me, Bethany Corbin, on LinkedIn. I also have Instagram, and I'll be starting a TikTok. So you can find me at FemTech Lawyer on both of those. The book is The FemTech Revolution. It's pretty in pink, of course, and you can buy it pretty much wherever you buy books. It's available on Amazon in both hardcover and I believe it's got an ebook as well. You can get it at Barnes and Noble, and I believe you can get it at Books A Million as well. And then if you'd like bulk purchases, Porchlight has bulk purchases, which I'm also happy to arrange for companies or organizations who are interested that way.
You're amazing. Bethany, thank you so much for joining me today, and keep doing everything you're doing, and we will keep supporting.
Thank you so much for having me, Allison. This was wonderful.
Absolutely. Bye.